The great crystal dome of Zenthari Prime sparkled with 1,000 colors as beings from across the galaxy gathered for their monthly meeting. Elder Mordoon floated above his glowing seat, his transparent body shimmering like water in starlight. Around the circular chamber, representatives from 12 different worlds sat in their special chairs, each designed for their unique forms. The Zephyrian delegate looked like a tall bird made of silver feathers. The crystalline being appeared as a walking mountain of precious stones that clinked softly when it moved. Others had tentacles, multiple eyes, or bodies that seemed to be made of pure energy, but all of them were ancient, wise, and powerful beyond human understanding. Before we discuss the war in the Outer Rim, Elder Mordoon's voice echoed through their minds rather than their ears. I wish to share something from our oldest records, a tale that has been passed down for thousands of years. Ambassador Tleknara of the Zephyrian courts ruffled her metallic feathers with amusement. Not the children's stories again, honored elder. We have real problems to solve. But Morden continued, his ancient eyes growing distant with memory. Long ago, our explorers found traces of a species unlike any other. They called themselves humans and lived on a blue world they named Earth. The stories about them sound impossible even now. He gestured, and holographic images appeared in the center of the chamber. They showed strange bipedal creatures, with soft skin and no natural weapons or armor. They looked weak and fragile compared to the mighty beings gathered in the council. These humans, Morden said, were said to possess the most contradictory nature ever recorded. They could show terrible cruelty to their own kind, yet dive into freezing waters to save complete strangers. They would fight wars over tiny differences, then work together to build wonders that touched the stars. Quintar, the living mountain, of crystal, vibrated with what passed for laughter among his kind. Amusing fiction, elder. No species could survive with such conflicting traits. Evolution would eliminate such inefficiency. Yet the stories persist, Morden replied. Tales speak of humans who could run for days without stopping, who survived in environments that would kill any rational being, who adapted to any world they encountered. They were said to have a saying, never give up, never surrender. The ethereal collective's youngest member, Yixara, leaned forward with curiosity. What happened to these mythical humans, elder? Why do we only have stories? Morden's form dimmed slightly. The records end abruptly. Some say they destroyed themselves in global war. Others believe they transcended physical existence. A few scholars think they never existed at all, that they were invented to teach lessons about the dangers of emotional extremes. Certainly they were fiction, declared General Voxmile of the Hegemony Guard. No species could be both savage and gentle, both weak and strong, both rational and completely insane. The biological contradictions alone would prevent such evolution. The other council members nodded in agreement. The idea of humans seemed absurd when examined logically. How could beings survive without natural armor or weapons? How could they function with such unstable emotions? How could they cooperate while being so individualistic? The stories do make for interesting entertainment, admitted Dr. Zalteth, the chief scientist of the collective. My offspring enjoy the tales of humans who somehow survived in space without proper protection, or who built flying machines before understanding physics, or who kept dangerous predators as companions they called pets. My favorite, chuckled Ambassador Tleknara, is the one where humans supposedly tamed fire and used it for cooking food instead of just warmth, as if any intelligent species would deliberately make their nutrition more difficult to obtain. Elder Morden watched the council's amusement with ancient patience. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps these humans were nothing more than stories told around fires on distant worlds. But sometimes I wonder what the galaxy would be like if such beings actually existed. Chaotic, General Voxmal replied immediately. Completely unpredictable and probably dangerous to civilized society. Or perhaps, Morden said softly, they would surprise us all. The conversation was interrupted by urgent alerts from the chamber's communication systems. Reports flooded in from the Outer Rim about the advancing Drakthari war fleets. The bioships were consuming world after world, their hunger apparently endless. Now this is a real threat, General Voxmall announced, his attention switching to tactical displays. Not mythical creatures, but an actual enemy that we must face. As the Council debated military strategies and defensive positions, none of them noticed the faint energy readings detected by deep space sensors. In a distant corner of the galaxy, in a sector marked only as Primitive Development Zone 7749, something was stirring. The blue world that ancient explorers had once called Earth continued its slow rotation around a yellow star. Its surface teemed with activity that the galaxy's most advanced sensors dismissed as simple electromagnetic noise. After all, everyone knew that sector contained nothing but primitive life forms who had barely learned to fly. Elder Morden, however, kept glancing at those distant readings throughout the emergency session. Something about them reminded him of the old stories, though he could not say exactly what. Captain Yulmak stretched his long tentacles and yawned as he reviewed the monthly reports from Sector 7749. The same boring data appeared on his screens that had been there for the past 300 years. Basic radio signals, primitive chemical rockets that barely left the planet's atmosphere, and absolutely nothing to suggest intelligent spacefaring life. Another quiet month from the Sol system, he muttered to his assistant, a young watcher named Plixara who had only been assigned to the monitoring station for 50 years. Mark it down as continued observation protocol and file it with the rest. Plixara's eye stalks drooped with disappointment. She had hoped for something exciting when she took this assignment, but monitoring primitive worlds was the most boring job in the Watcher Order. Sir, shouldn't we investigate those energy readings more closely? Some of the patterns seem unusual. Yulmax's tentacles waved dismissively. Trust me, young one. I've been watching this sector for 8 centuries. It's always the same. They discover fire, then metal, then electricity, then radio waves. They're probably still fighting each other with crude weapons and haven't even figured out how to work together properly. He pulled up historical records on his display. Look here. 3,000 years ago, they were throwing rocks at each other. 2,000 years ago, they had metal swords. 1,000 years ago, they invented gunpowder. Now they have atomic weapons and chemical rockets. They're following the standard primitive development pattern, just very slowly. But sir, Plixara insisted, pointing to recent data streams, their electromagnetic emissions have increased dramatically in the past century, and look at these thermal signatures from their industrial centers. Yulmax barely glanced at the readings. Industrial revolution happens to every species eventually. They'll probably blow themselves up with pollution or nuclear war before they figure out faster than light travel. It's sad but predictable. Far across the galaxy, the real crisis was unfolding. High Commander Vexrath of the Drakthari hegemony stood in the bio-neural command center of his flagship, studying invasion routes across 3-dimensional holographic displays. His species had perfected the art of conquest over millennia, turning war into a precise science. Status report, he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had consumed dozens of civilizations. General Throckle approached, his chitinous armor clicking against the organic floor. The Outer Rim campaigns proceed ahead of schedule, Commander. The Kelleran system fell yesterday. The Nexus Trade Federation has surrendered without fighting. Our bioships have processed 17 worlds this quarter. Vexrath's multiple eyes studied the tactical display with satisfaction. Red zones marked conquered territories where Drakthari bioships had stripped away all useful resources, leaving dead rocks behind. Green areas showed upcoming targets, mostly wealthy trading worlds or strategic military positions. What about resistance from the Galactic Council? Vexrath asked. Minimal, Throckle replied with contempt. They're still debating proper diplomatic responses while we consume their outer territories. Their unity protocols prevent quick military action. By the time they organize a defense, we'll have taken everything worth taking. The hegemony's strategy was brutally simple. Their living ships could reproduce by consuming organic matter from conquered worlds. Each victory made them stronger, while their enemies grew weaker. They avoided heavily defended core worlds, instead picking off isolated colonies and trade routes. What about this region? Vexrath pointed to a small cluster of systems marked in gray on the tactical display. Sector 7749. No defensive installation shown. Throckle consulted his datapad. Primitive world, Commander. Pre-spaceflight civilization. Our scouts classify it as negligible threat, minimal resources. The energy expenditure to reach that sector wouldn't justify the gains. Efficient, Vexrath approved. Continue with primary expansion vectors. Focus on the Centaurian commercial zone next. Neither the Drakthari commanders nor the Watcher monitoring stations realized that their primitive target was far from helpless. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, in facilities that no orbital sensor could detect, human scientists and engineers worked with quiet determination. Dr. Kim Hanna looked up from her quantum mechanics calculations in the underground laboratory. Complex beneath Sol. The theoretical framework is sound, she announced to her international team. We can achieve faster than light travel, but we need more time to build and test the drive systems. Her colleague, Professor Li Dong from the Moscow Institute of Technology, nodded grimly. Our deep space monitoring arrays are detecting increased military activity in nearby sectors. Something big is happening out there. How long until we're ready? Asked Colonel Park Soo, the military liaison assigned to oversee the project. 6 months for a prototype, Dr. Kim replied. 2 years for a fleet capable of defending Earth. Let's hope we have that long, Colonel Park muttered, studying reports from their hidden observation posts scattered throughout the solar system. Back at the monitoring station, Captain Yulmax filed his routine report and settled in for another peaceful shift. The Sol system's energy readings had increased slightly, but that was normal for a species entering its industrial phase. Soon they would discover computers, then basic space travel. Then maybe in a few thousand years they might become interesting enough to contact officially. He had no way of knowing that the primitive signals his instruments detected were actually carefully designed to appear primitive, or that the beings on that blue world had been listening to galactic communications for centuries, learning languages, studying potential threats, and preparing for the day when hiding would no longer be possible. That day was coming much sooner than anyone expected. Scout Commander Throckle's bioship Endless Hunger moved through space like a living predator, its organic hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. He had been chasing a group of refugee ships for 3 days, and the hunt was nearly over. The fleeing vessels had led him into the outer edges of some forgotten system, but there was nowhere left for them to run. Commander, his sensor operator called out, her voice filled with confusion. I'm detecting artificial structures in this system, metal constructions with primitive fusion drives, but the energy signatures don't match anything in our databases. Throckle's mandibles clicked with interest as he moved to the viewing membrane. Through the transparent biomaterial, he could see several angular vessels emerging from behind the system's largest gas giant. They looked crude and blocky, nothing like the elegant curves of proper starships. Their hulls were made of simple, metal alloys welded together in straight lines that hurt his aesthetic sensibilities. Scan for life forms, he ordered. Confirmed, Commander. Bipedal carbon-based organisms, surprisingly dense bone structure and redundant organ systems. Their biology seems unusually resilient for such a primitive species. The alien vessels moved, with clumsy determination toward the Drakthari scout fleet. Throckle counted 12 of them, each one smaller than his smallest escort ship. They arranged themselves in a defensive formation that showed some tactical knowledge, but their technology was obviously centuries behind his own. Commander, they're broadcasting something, the communications officer reported. The translation, Matrix is having difficulty with their language structure. After several moments of processing, the ship's bio-neural computer produced a message in broken galactic standard. Unknown vessels, you have entered protected space. Identify yourselves immediately and explain your presence here. Throckle's entire crew began making the chittering sound that passed for laughter among their species. Primitives giving orders to the mighty Drakthari. The audacity was both amusing and insulting. Send a standard intimidation response, Throckle commanded. Tell them they are about to be consumed by the hegemony, and that resistance will only make their deaths more painful. The reply came back almost immediately, this time in clearer galactic standard. This is Captain Nam Jun of the Terran Defense Force. You are in violation of our space. Withdraw immediately or face defensive action. Defensive action. Thruckle's laughter echoed through the command chamber. From those metal scraps, destroy them all. Leave nothing but debris. The battle that followed would be studied by Drakthari, military analysts for years afterward, though none of them would ever fully understand what they witnessed. The human vessels fought in ways that violated every principle of space combat known to civilized warfare. Instead of maintaining safe distances and exchanging long-range fire, the humans closed to point-blank range immediately. When they're primitive, weapons proved insufficient to penetrate Drakthari bioarmor. They used their ships as weapons, ramming the larger vessels at full speed. One human ship, its hull breached and atmosphere venting, somehow managed to detonate its fusion reactor inside a Drakthari cruiser's feeding chamber. How are they coordinating? Thruckle demanded as his formation scattered under the chaotic assault. I'm not detecting any communication signals between their vessels. Unknown, Commander. They seem to anticipate each other's movements without transmitted orders. The humans fought with a desperation that bordered on insanity. When their weapons failed, they improvised new ones. When their ships were damaged, they continued fighting until they were destroyed completely. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to learn from each engagement, adapting their tactics in real time. Captain Nam Jun's voice crackled over the communication channels as his ship, the Soul's Pride, rammed into the side of Thruckle's flagship. Tell your leaders, he said calmly as his vessel's hull began to buckle, that humanity remembers its enemies. The explosion that followed sent shockwaves through both fleets. When the debris cleared, the Soul's Pride was gone, but it had torn a massive hole in the bioship's feeding section. Commander, his tactical officer called out in panic, we're detecting more human vessels approaching from the inner system. Dozens of them. Through the viewing membrane, Thruckle could see a new wave of human ships accelerating toward the battle. These looked even more primitive than the first group, some appearing to be hastily converted civilian vessels. But they moved with the same determined aggression as their predecessors. Retreat, Thruckle ordered, his pride overcome by tactical necessity. All ships withdraw to safe distance. As the surviving Drakthari vessels fled toward the system's edge, they left behind 12 destroyed human ships and the scattered remains of the refugee vessels they had originally been pursuing. But the cost to the supposedly superior Drakthari had been devastating. 8 bioships destroyed or severely damaged by primitives who shouldn't have been able to scratch their hulls. The final transmission from the human fleet followed them into hyperspace. This is Admiral Parkman of Earth Defense Command. You have exactly 1 standard day to remove all Drakthari forces from this system. After that, we will consider any presence an act of war. When Thruckle's report reached High Commander Vexrath, the response was swift and predictable. The Drakthari had built their empire on the principle that overwhelming force solved all problems. If these humans wanted to play at war, the hegemony would show them what true warfare meant. Orders went out immediately. Assemble the largest war fleet in Drakthari history and reduce the Sol system to cosmic dust. Admiral Kang Seok stood in the underground command center beneath Sol, watching dozens of screens that painted the same terrifying picture. Massive bioships filled the displays, their organic hulls pulsing with alien life as they moved toward Earth like a swarm of cosmic locusts. The Drakthari war fleet was the largest military force ever assembled in this sector of the galaxy. How many? He asked quietly. Captain Park Mira stepped forward, her face pale but determined. 347 confirmed bioships, sir. Our analysis suggests they can reproduce by consuming organic matter from planets. Each ship is essentially a living weapon that grows stronger with every victory. Time until they reach Earth orbit? 72 hours, Admiral. Kang Seok nodded slowly, then turned to address the room full of officers from every nation on Earth. Chinese generals sat beside American admirals. Russian scientists worked alongside Japanese engineers. For the first time in human history, the entire species faced a common enemy that threatened their very existence. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, 3 days ago most of you didn't know aliens existed. Today we must prepare to fight the most advanced military force in the galaxy. The question is not whether we can win, but whether we can make them pay such a high price for victory that they think twice about threatening Earth again. What happened next would be remembered as the greatest mobilization in human history. Ancient enemies became allies in a matter of hours. North and South Korea opened their borders to each other for the first time in decades. India and Pakistan shared military technology without hesitation. Israel and Palestine coordinated their defense systems. In Detroit, automobile factories that had built cars for a century retooled their assembly lines overnight to manufacture particle beam weapons. The workers, many of whom had never seen military equipment, learned to build instruments of war with the same precision they had once used to create family vehicles. Dr. Lee Hanna worked without sleep in a hastily constructed laboratory beneath the Australian outback. Around her, the brightest minds from every continent collaborated on projects that should have taken years to complete. Russian physicists explained quantum mechanics to Brazilian engineers, while American computer experts programmed targeting systems with help from South Korean artificial intelligence specialists. The alien hull material regenerates damage using biological processes, she explained to the international team gathered around her workstation. But every biological system has weaknesses. If we can disrupt their cellular regeneration at the molecular level, we can turn their greatest strength into a vulnerability, finished Dr. Chen Wei from Beijing, his eyes lighting up with understanding. Instead of healing damage, their ships would consume themselves. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens performed extraordinary tasks. In Mumbai, textile workers who had spent their lives making clothes learned to weave advanced composite materials for spacecraft armor. In São Paulo, construction workers who built skyscrapers suddenly found themselves assembling orbital defense platforms. The children of Earth watched their parents transform into warriors. In schools around the globe, teachers explained why mommy and daddy had to work at the big factories now, why the night sky sometimes lit up with rocket launches, and why everyone needed to be very brave for a little while. The siege began exactly 72 hours later. Drakthari bioships darkened the sky above every major city, their organic hulls blocking out the sun as they prepared to rain destruction on the world below. The first wave of attacks targeted military installations, government centers, and major population areas. But something unexpected happened. Instead of panicking or surrendering, humanity fought back with a ferocity that surprised even themselves. When the aliens destroyed conventional weapons, humans built new ones from scrap metal and industrial equipment. When their military bases were bombed, they moved operations into subway tunnels and underground parking garages. Commander Throckle, now leading the orbital assault, found himself facing an enemy that refused to behave logically. Human pilots flew civilian aircraft directly into bioship feeding chambers, detonating whatever explosives they could carry. Ground forces used construction equipment as weapons, turning bulldozers into tanks and cranes into missile launchers. Most disturbing were the reports coming from Throckle's own supply lines. Small human vessels had somehow appeared behind Drakthari lines, striking supply convoys and communication relays with surgical precision. These ships moved faster than anything in the alien database and seemed to vanish as quickly as they appeared. How are they doing this? Throckle demanded of his tactical officers. Our technology is centuries ahead of theirs. How are primitive bipeds outmaneuvering our fastest scouts? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Kim Tae, working in a secret facility beneath the Himalayas, had successfully reverse-engineered Drakthari faster-than-light technology from the wreckage of the first battle. Within weeks, human engineers had not only copied alien systems but improved upon them. The organic technology is elegant, she explained to her team while explosions rocked the mountain above them. But it's predictable. Biology follows patterns. Once you understand the patterns, you can anticipate and counter them. As the siege entered its third month, something unprecedented happened in Drakthari military history. For the first time in their species' expansion, they were losing a war. Not just losing battles, but actually being pushed back by supposedly primitive opponents who seemed to get stronger with each engagement. The giant was fully awake now, and it was very, very angry. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was interrupted by an impossible signal. The communication came from Sector 7749, the primitive zone that everyone knew contained nothing but backward creatures who had barely learned to fly. Yet, somehow the transmission was crystal clear and used perfect galactic standard. "Honorable representatives of the Galactic Council," the voice said calmly. "This is Ambassador Kim Tae of the Terran Federation. We respectfully request an immediate assembly to discuss matters of galactic security and the recent termination of the Drakthari threat." Elder Morden's ethereal form flickered with shock. Around the crystalline chamber, beings from 12 civilizations stared at their communication devices in disbelief. The Zephyrian delegates' metallic feathers rustled with confusion, while the crystalline representative's stone body vibrated with uncertainty. "That sector doesn't have faster-than-light communication," Ambassador Tleknara protested. "Our watchers confirmed they're still primitive." "Apparently not anymore," General Voxmal observed as his tactical sensors detected multiple unknown vessels dropping out of hyperspace near Xanthari Prime. "And they're here." When the human delegation entered the council chambers, they defied every expectation the assembled beings had formed. They walked with quiet confidence, their simple but obviously functional environmental suits humming with technology that didn't appear in any galactic database. Their leader, Ambassador Kim Tae, approached the central podium with the calm manner of someone who had prepared for this moment for a very long time. "Honored council members," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "Humanity has been observing your civilization for approximately 800 standard years. We have monitored your communications, learned your languages, studied your histories, and watched your conflicts with great interest." The silence in the chamber was complete. Elder Morden found his voice first. "You've been watching us? For 8 centuries?" "Indeed," Kim Tae replied. "We developed the technology to detect and translate your transmissions long ago. We learned about your trade agreements, your territorial disputes, your scientific discoveries, and your cultural exchanges. We studied each of your species' strengths and weaknesses." Captain Yoon-jae stepped forward, his environmental suit bearing scars from recent battles. His face was calm, but his eyes held the look of someone who had seen too much combat in too short a time. "We remained hidden because we weren't ready to join galactic society. Our technology was inferior, our political systems were fragmented, and we were still learning to work together as a species. Then the Drakthari brought war to our home." Kim Tae continued. "They attacked our vessels, threatened our world, and forced us to make a choice. We could remain hidden and hope they would ignore us, or we could defend ourselves." The crystalline representative, Quintar, managed to speak through his shock. "The Drakthari hegemony has terrorized this galaxy for decades. Their bioships have consumed dozens of civilizations. How could primitives possibly—" "We're no longer primitive," Captain Yoon-jae interrupted gently. "The Drakthari invasion lasted 6 months. In that time, we reverse-engineered their faster-than-light technology, developed our own improvements, built a war fleet, and systematically dismantled their empire." Ambassador Tleknara's feathers stood on end. "You destroyed the Drakthari? The entire hegemony?" "Their military capability has been eliminated," Kim Tae confirmed. "Their bioships have been captured or destroyed. Their command structure has been neutralized. The survivors are being relocated to uninhabited worlds where they can no longer threaten anyone." Dr. Zalteth, the Council's chief scientist, leaned forward with desperate curiosity. "How?" "Their technology was organic, self-repairing, constantly adapting. It should have been impossible for any species to counter it so quickly." Captain Yoon-jae's expression grew serious. "We learned something during the war that perhaps your civilizations have forgotten. Desperation breeds innovation faster than comfort ever could. When your survival depends on solving impossible problems, you find ways to solve them. We also discovered," Kim Tae added, "that being underestimated is a significant tactical advantage. The Drakthari expected us to fight like civilized beings, following established patterns of warfare. Instead, we fought like humans, Elder Morden's ancient memory stirred. The old stories, the legends about your species, they spoke of impossible contradictions, of beings who never surrendered. Every story you told about us, Kim Tae said quietly. Every fable your children learned. We are exactly what your myths claimed we were. We adapt to any environment. We never give up when threatened, and we can be both terrifyingly destructive and surprisingly compassionate, depending on how we're treated. The chamber fell silent again as the implications sank in. Finally, General Voxmal asked the question. Everyone was thinking, "What do you want from us?" Kim Tae's expression remained neutral. "We want what we've always wanted, to be left alone to develop in peace, but that's no longer possible. We've been forced into the galactic community by circumstances beyond our control." She paused, looking at each council member in turn. "We've been listening to your debates for centuries. We've watched species suffer while you argued about proper diplomatic protocols. We've seen worlds die while you discussed committee procedures. The galaxy is safer today because the Drakthari threat has ended. Whether it remains safe tomorrow depends entirely on the choices this council makes." The session ended in chaos. But one thing was absolutely clear. The age of human mythology was over. The age of human reality had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.